Ultima Underworld. Ultima. Now that's a name I've not heard in a long time. Long time.
I think my uncle knows him. He said he was dead.
Oh, he's not dead. Not yet.
So you know him?
Well, of course I know him. He's me. On Two-Headed Hero, you'll often find us peering into the pits of PC gaming's past and resurrecting ancient games on modern computers. My name is Bawss Sawss, and today, I'll be your resident retromancer. Welcome to a very special episode of Two-Headed Hero, where we will be taking a look back not at one, but two treasured relics from the past, the Ultima Underworld series. Widely considered as the grandfathers of the immersive simulation genre of games, Ultima Underworld is often cited as the inspiration for many of these non-linear, exploratory titles that gamers have come to know and love. The Elder Scrolls, Deus Ex, BioShock, and Dishonored are just a few of the blockbuster series that owe a debt of gratitude to this pair of ancient games. The long dormant, but never totally forgotten Ultima Underworld series will finally be returning to screens everywhere with the upcoming release of Underworld Ascendant on November 15th of this year. This sequel to Ultima Underworld aims to recapture that magic from a quarter century ago, and will finally see the light of day after 4.5 years of development. Underworld Ascendant was made possible in no small part due to successful crowdfunding, an excited core fanbase, and the involvement of some of the original minds behind the immersive sim genre. Ever since Underworld Ascendant was announced, I've been watching with growing excitement. In this, I'm surely not alone. So, in anticipation of the upcoming release, I was already anxious to get my dungeon crawl on. Having never played much of either of the old games in the series, I figured there was no better time to dive deep into the ancient underworlds myself and see what all the fuss was about. For those of you out there not in the know, Ultima was a groundbreaking series of PC role-playing games that enjoyed a solid 2-decade run, with nearly 20 releases between 1979 and 1999. The brain behind this vast and iconic world, Richard Garriott, also known as Lord British, began the series with a simple hack-and-slasher by the name of, I'm gonna butcher this, Akalebeth? I'm gonna go with Akalebeth. Garriott sold his game in Ziploc bags from the shelves of the Computerland retail store that employed him. Akalebeth, which series fans now refer to as Ultima Zero, was picked up by publisher California Pacific and went on to sell 30,000 copies for the Apple II back in 1980. From there, Garriott successfully continued the franchise and went on to co-found his own game company, Origin Systems. Origin became a studio name synonymous with deep and expansive games, and was purchased by Electronic Arts in September of 1992, just months after Ultima Underworld's release. Origin went on to create the first graphical MMORPG, Ultima Online, in 1997. Following the dismal flop of Ultima 9, Origin was sadly dismantled by Electronic Arts in 2004. Origin lives on in name only as EA's subpar digital distribution system for PC game offerings. It's a pretty sad legacy for one of PC gaming's most influential development titans. As for the world of Sosaria, and the Ultima series itself, both lay dormant and untouched for years. Game archaeologists over at GOG resuscitated Ultima Underworld and its sequel in 2011, adding them to the site's growing library of forgotten DOS titles. And to be fair, the GOG versions run quite good on modern machines, even though each game has a couple of issues, but we'll get to that in a moment. Before I get ahead of myself, yes, I do realize that Ultima Underworld 1 and 2 are very well-loved games. I can hear the old guard PC gamers in the distance already, sharpening their axes so they can chop me into bits and throw the chunks in with the rotworm stew at the first sign of a critical comment. And oh, god damn it.
Death to the unbeliever!
Look, Look, I'm on your side, guys. Old games are important, and it's really cool to see where the influences for our modern titles came from. But not having much experience with these titles since I first saw them as a kid, I'm in a unique position. I can still appreciate Ultima Underworld and its successor while maintaining a healthy level of objectivity, since my views are a little less colored by the warm, fuzzy lens of nostalgia. So, let's get comfy, crack open a tasty beverage, and take a look back to the past at the game that started it all.
Ultima Underworld, the Stygian Abyss.
The player takes on the role of Ultima series protagonist, the Avatar, who witnesses the kidnapping of Baron Almric's daughter. Unfortunately, since the Avatar is caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, the Baron tosses them into the Stygian Abyss, a former colony on a remote volcanic island now turned into an inescapable prison. Your task? Traverse the deadly abyss, rescue the girl, and prove your innocence. This all sounds simple enough in theory, but Ultima Underworld's plot takes a few twists and turns. The Avatar stumbles on evil wizards and demon summoning plots, all while uncovering the fate of the failed colony. This is done via first-person exploration and combat in the game's revolutionary 3D engine. I admit, Ultima Underworld isn't much to look at nowadays.
How dare you? She is beautiful beyond measure.
Look at those walls! Those curves! Guys, hear me out. Your window to the world is tiny. The interface is huge and cumbersome. The characters and items are all surrounded with giant, ugly black pixels. But for the time, there was nothing like it. id Software's Raycast engine games, Wolfenstein 3D and Doom were still a few months away. A fully realized 3D world with textured walls, ceilings, and floors was mind-blowing by itself in 1992, but sloped floors, bridges, smooth lighting? A ton of this stuff gave later games a run for the money, at least on a technical level. As for the sound, we'll just say it's problematic. Ultima Underworld's sounds were totally foobar when I first started playing. It's easier if I just show you. What is my footsteps are piano noises? Swimming is what, a xylophone? This can't be right. The music was also just blaring, and there's no in-game volume controls other than on or off. I couldn't play it like this, so off to the internet we go! Well, it turns out that there's some problems with the sounds in both of the Ultima Underworld games when played through modern operating systems. No kidding. So what's the fix? Well, I stumbled across a post describing some configuration file changes that got me some decent sort of 8-bit style audio. The effects are all kind of basic and farty though. I also found out it was possible to get the far superior Roland MT32 soundtrack by downloading some software emulators. The process is kind of complex, and after messing around with it for a while, I ended up stuck with the basic Sound Blaster effects in music anyhow. But here's how the music is supposed to sound. It's pretty good. It reminds me of Conan the Barbarian a little bit overall.
Good? Just good? The soundtrack is an auditory masterpiece. You'd do well to remember your place, casual.
Guys, I get it, okay? It's good. It's real good. Let's just move it along here. So, on to the important questions. Does Ultima Underworld still hold up, or is it another case of overblown nostalgia? Well, let's break it down. The game starts you off with a voiced introduction.
Drop to below to an accomplice, all right, Jack? Well, he'll now escape us, and when we bring him back, he'll both hang.
Impressive. And then it throws you right to the title screen where you design your avatar. There's a lot of choices here, and each of them are explained in the game's manual. It works best to have that printed out or keep it handy on another screen. While you're at it, the reference card and spell list are something you'll refer to all the time. Underworld really wants players to take notes, and it's not shy about chucking a lot of information your way. More on that in a minute. Even though the game has a pretty big list of stats and skills, there's only one stat that really matters: strength. You can't raise any of your 4 basic stats after character generation, so be sure to pick a class like Druid or Paladin to get a good strength roll. Otherwise, be prepared to pass up armor or backtrack between numerous stashes of items. The avatar has a pretty tight weight limit, and you'll be required to carry a bunch of stuff around for a lot of the game. Strength all the way, baby. Don't know what skills to take? Don't take lockpick. Any door that can be picked can also just be smashed with your fist until it opens. Search and traps are also useless. Secret doors are pretty obvious, and there don't seem to be any traps you can disarm in the entire game. The social skills aren't needed at all since there's not much to trade for. Only about 30 gold pieces are needed to finish the main quest, and treasure is everywhere. Lore is nice, but you can use a spell or pay certain characters to identify items. So I'd recommend starting with sword, casting, and mana. That way you'll be able to use the best weapons, hit enemies more often, and screw up spells less often.
Foul heathen, player choice is the basis of the game. If I want to create an eagle-eyed bard that rivals Olympic swimmers, then that is my right.
Whoa, look buddy, yes, player choice is important. It's great to be able to suit as many playstyles as possible. However, those choices have to be meaningful in the context of the game. The fact that there's a ton of skills that don't have any meaningful use doesn't add anything to the game, it just cripples players that don't take the most effective ones. You can choose between 2 difficulty levels. Make it easy on yourself. In my opinion, easy mode gave the game a better pace. The hit detection in combat is spotty, walls or doors or floors can sometimes get in the way. Hits and misses are determined by behind-the-scenes dice rolls. It's hard to tell if you've aimed yourself correctly at enemies. There's no feedback or log text that indicates if an attack has missed.
Are you listening to yourself? The combat is revolutionary. You can slash, thrust, and chop with every weapon, or loose arrows from a mighty crossbow. And you turn down the difficulty? What a friggin' casual.
Kill the casual! Kill him!
Hey, I'm up for a challenge, but fun factor trumps everything. Most of the weapons have one attack type that works better than the others, so you're just gonna end up using that one anyhow. The missile weapons are a joke because of the physics, low damage output, and janky aiming. It's just not worth it. In both of these games, exploring, plot exposition, and puzzle solving are far more fun than clicking the mouse button over and over on a single bad guy. Normal difficulty just means you'll be clicking your way through a lot more combat and dying a lot more often. Ultima Underworld is also a pretty hard game, so you'll need every advantage you can get. I started over my normal difficulty run right around the point when I got down to level 2. Trust me, pick easy. Once you're all done making your avatar, you're dumped right into the entrance to the Stygian Abyss. You'll want to take a minute to get used to the controls. Yeah, there's a lot. While you can play with only a mouse, I would not recommend it. A combination of the WSAD keys to run and turn and the mouse cursor to interact and fight is much more efficient. But then there's the jumping. Oh, the jumping.
Careful, casual. Step lightly.
Oh, I intend to. Unfortunately, if I do, it probably means I'm going to bounce off of the corner of a ledge 4 or 5 times. Here's the thing. At this time, developers were just figuring out ways to solve the problem of first-person movement, so a little jankiness is understandable. Still, the jumping in Underworld is just bad. There's no way around it. The physics cause the avatar to bounce around when hitting a surface, so even simple jumps can require some trial and error. What's worse, there's a ton of puzzles here that require pixel-perfect jumps to tiny platforms. You can't see your feet, and you can only look down at about a 45-degree angle. There's a lot of guesswork involved. Be prepared to save your game before and after every single jump. Later in the game, spells like fly or levitate help make this easier, but there's also certain areas where magic doesn't work at all, so it's back to jumping for you! Speaking of magic, there's a huge list of spells. There's actually even more spells than this that are not documented. Sometimes they can be found on scrolls or by talking to magic users. Spells are all cast by putting combinations of 2 or 3 runes together in the rune bag. Each rune is supposed to represent a different element or action, and the system is designed to encourage experimentation. It's a neat idea, even if it's a little inconvenient. There's no way to cast a favorite spell quickly or easily switch between them since you have to fart around with the rune bag. Doing this during combat is pretty impractical, so instead you'll want to use spells to light your way, create food, open doors, levitate, and enhance your defense. Magic is important, maybe even necessary, for getting through the lower levels of the Stygian Abyss. There's even a cool hidden game over spell called Armageddon that removes every item and character from the world. This makes the game unwinnable though. Either way, you'll want to max out that casting skill as soon as you can. In order to increase your skills, the avatar earns experience levels. However, you still have to find shrines to train up your newly acquired skills. Once you finally stumble across a shrine, you'll have to chant the correct mantra to train up the skill that you want. The game makes you actually type in these mantras. The manual lists a few of the basic ones, but the rest have to be found as clues in the game world or from character conversations. So, progression requires gaining experience levels, heading to a shrine, then knowing the correct mantra to chant. This seems like a neat idea, adding more simulation elements into the game, but in practice it's needlessly complicated and adds a lot more backtracking. The levels in Ultima Underworld are large and maze-like. There's a lot of different environments, but it's still pretty easy to get turned around. Good thing the game places a detailed automap in the very first room. Even better, the map allows you to make your own notes. You can use the blank pages to keep track of quests, mantras, spells, and other important clues. You'll need it. Remember back when I said the game throws a lot of information at players? Well, at least it provides a decent place to keep it all. Once you get used to the controls, Ultima Underworld excels at exploration. The Stygian Abyss is pretty detailed. The avatar needs food, sleep, and light. Equipment degrades with use. There's a ton of characters to speak with, including a talking door, and not all of them need to be put to the point of the blade. Even the goblins can be friendly. Well, not all the goblins. Discovering new communities and helping them with their problems or finding creative and non-violent ways to further your quest is pretty fun and fulfilling. Or if you prefer, you can sometimes take the violent way out and just hack and slash your way to victory. Overall, I'd say that Ultima Underworld is still a pretty entertaining immersive sim, even though it's clear that a lot of the ideas behind it were unrefined. It doesn't hold up as well as some of its successors, and that's largely due to the confusing and unintuitive design choices. Still, if you're willing to stick out the arcane control scheme, there's a pretty compelling game underneath. I did manage to finish the first Underworld game, but near the end it seemed to drag on. I actually needed a break during my last legs of my hike through the Stygian Abyss. When the game mentioned the word maze for the 6th time, that was a good enough reason as any to distract myself with
Ultima Underworld II, Labyrinth of Worlds.
The second game came out just 9 months after the release of Ultima Underworld I, in January of 1993. There's a surprising amount of improvements in this game over its predecessor. Unlike the first game, Underworld II was designed from the ground up to be a mainline entry in the Ultima series, and takes place 1 year after the events of Ultima VII. It also has a much more interesting premise.
Okay. Go on.
Players once again take on the role of the Avatar, who is invited to a huge celebration at Castle Britannia as a guest of Lord British himself. The Guardian, a titanic red-faced monkey and longtime enemy of the Avatar, chooses this moment to trap the inhabitants of the castle in a giant sphere of magical black rock, which is suitably known as Black Rock in the game. It's up to the Avatar to once again disrupt the Guardian's plans and find a way to break the barrier before the castle's inhabitants all starve to death. Early on, you stumble across a flaw in the Guardian's spell. This flaw takes the form of a big glowing gem in the castle basement that can transport the Avatar to other worlds and dimensions. You quickly find out that each of these worlds has suffered in the wake of the Guardian's influence. You also find out that each world holds a key to freeing Britannia from the monkey-faced Titan's magic. Like I said before, there's a lot of noticeable improvements here right off the bat. For one, the view screen is a lot bigger. Graphics are much nicer too, no more chunky black outlines around everything. There's a lot more variety in the character graphics and nicer portraits in the conversations. The environments look more crisp and detailed. There is some weird stuff with the lighting when you look all the way up or down. Chunky black triangles appear in the corners of the screen. But still, Ultima Underworld II looks a lot more polished and cohesive than the first game.
Yes, it's beautiful. Precious.
Unfortunately, Underworld 2 also suffers from sound issues, at least on Windows 10. When I started up the game for the first time, there was a surprising lack of background music during the intro. After making my avatar and checking out my room, I noticed that the sound effects were much higher quality. Footsteps sounded like footsteps. Punches sounded sort of like punches. But still, no music. So I went back to forums and messed around again in configuration files. I managed to get the music working, but the nicer sound effects were gone, replaced with the same farty MIDI noises as the first game. Apparently there's supposed to be speech that plays when the Guardian taunts you throughout the game, but I couldn't get it working. Oh well, close enough.
Casual? Can't even figure out how to get the sound working right. Just build a retro PC already, noob.
Yeah guys, I'm not gonna do that. The Sound Blaster jams will be good enough for me. I want to actually play the game, not screw around for hours with audio settings. The soundtrack in Ultima 2 is okay. The songs are not nearly as iconic as the first game's excellent fantasy movie style soundtrack, and some of the worlds have pretty obnoxious and repetitive tunes. There's a few good standouts though, like the Blackrock prison theme, for example. How does Ultima Underworld 2 compare to the first game? Well, gameplay-wise, Underworld 2 makes a good amount of improvements, but still repeats some of the same mistakes of the first game.
For shame! Labyrinth of Worlds stands a full head and shoulders over its predecessor. Say no more.
Guys, I do like the second one better, but it's not perfect. Character creation, the magic system, the automap, and the controls all work the same way as they did in Underworld 1, for better or worse. There's a few more spells, but the useful ones are all familiar. Progression works in a similar way, but now you can see how many skill points you have left to spend. The game also seems to throw a lot more skill points at you. I finished Ultima Underworld 2 without even spending them all. Instead of the hassle of finding shrines and chanting mantras, you can now visit trainers to boost your skills. This is still kind of a pain rather than being able to level up on the spot, but at least most of the trainers are located in a single level. As in the first Underworld, taking sword, casting, and mana skills will get you through the meat of the game. There's still no reason to take most of the other skills at all, and this feels like a missed opportunity. Underworld 2 does a much better job with investing players in the story. Rather than the first game's approach of setting you loose in a gigantic spaghetti dungeon, Castle Britannia acts as the Avatar's central hub. Recurring characters from the mainline Ultima series make appearances here. As you progress, your conversations with these characters help drive the plot onwards. There's even some interesting problems that can't be solved with the edge of a sword, such as negotiating the end of a servant strike. The pacing and structure of Ultima Underworld 2 seems a lot more streamlined, even though both games clock in around 30 hours. While there's still a bit of backtracking, there's much less feeling of repetition due to the sheer variety of the worlds you visit. For everything that Ultima Underworld II does better, there's plenty that seems like a step backwards. Remember how I talked about how bad the platforming is in the first game? Ultima Underworld II doubles down on it. This particular type of puzzle, the big square room with tiny columns you have to jump on, it shows up around half a dozen times throughout the game, maybe more, and it sucks just as much each time.
Sounds like someone just needs to get good.
On the other hand, there's some fun and creative puzzles in places like the alien world of Talorus. Combat in Ultima Underworld II works the exact same way as the first game, but the sequel has no problem with throwing hordes of enemies at you. You'll often be battling a dozen or more monsters at one time. Once one monster becomes hostile, it seems like many of the other enemies in the level beeline it towards you. There's a lot more wide open spaces here and it's easy to get surrounded. There's even an obligatory hell level fight. Eat your heart out, Doom. Some of the more important opponents are damage sponges, which just become super tedious to defeat. Certain items can also make a lot of the combat pretty trivial, such as the Sword of Stone Strike or the Flameproof Vest. Hope you picked easy difficulty again, otherwise your mouse hand will get tired or you'll be seeing that game over animation a lot. Or both. Despite all of my previous complaints, I actually had a way better time with Ultima Underworld II. Both games have merits, but Underworld II had more memorable characters and more unique environments. It was interesting to see the results of the Guardian's influence on the other worlds, and having a big red ape taunt you throughout your quest did far more to build up the urgency of the Avatar's task and establish the antagonist. After spending the last month and a half playing Ultima Underworld I and II, I can understand the allure, but not everyone will share that view. Both games are somewhat unrefined and the learning curve is pretty high. Gamers that have the patience to trudge through the arcane systems will feel like wizards themselves after puzzling through the ins and outs of the Stygian Abyss and the Labyrinth of Worlds. I can only hope that the highly anticipated Underworld Ascendant takes immersive sims to the next level by adding more player freedoms, more compelling characters, and especially more modern controls. So, there we go guys. Ultima Underworld I and II, a bit rough by today's standards, but still enjoyable if you can stick with them. So what do you say we let bygones be bygones and you untie us?
I think not. You talked for far too long.
And now we're hungry.
Barbecue the unbeliever.
Well, nice knowing you, buddy. Pass the salt.